if you're listening to this, I know what you're feeling. But I'm here to tell you, if you take away anything from this today, listen to me when I tell you that no one is beyond hope. No one is beyond healing, and no one is too far gone. Our bodies and our brains have a capacity to heal like you've never known. I was hopeless and I was helpless and I was skeptical that anything could make me better. And I am here to tell you that you can find freedom. You can find healing.
Hello, friends. Welcome back to my goofy little podcast where I attempt to make new friends by having them recount the most traumatic things they've ever experienced in their lives. And for some reason, people keep coming back. So I have to keep doing episodes, I guess. Today, I have a wonderful, incredible human being who has been through a crazy journey. Her name is Valerie Anne Smith. And what I think the title of this is going to be, which is something I saw as part of your post that you have pinned on your X feed, was that you healed a broken brain. And I'm sure there are so many people out there that can hear that and think, I could use that, because I know so many, both friends and other people I just know of, acquaintances and stories about families and friends who are having all sorts of mental issues. And I haven't heard a story from someone who had a more difficult mental turmoil to go through than you. So I think this will be so valuable for people. And you have such a gift for storytelling. So Valerie Anne Smith, or maybe Valerie Smith, is that what you like to go by? It is so wonderful to have you here. Thank you so much for joining me today.
I'm very honored to be here. When you contacted me in April, I was so excited. I'm like, yes, Ben, yes.
We've been following each other for a while. I know you've been just going crazy out there. It's been so cool to watch.
Yeah, it has been. It's been wonderful to get to know you through the screen by watching your podcast. Learning about your great personality, your joy, and your zest for life. But getting to see you face to face and actually talk to you is completely wonderful.
The feeling is very mutual. And with that, I think it's time to go back into the story of Miss Valerie Smith. You have had quite a journey from childhood, like from the very beginning of your life. Why don't we start all the way back? I know that you can, when you tell your stories on other podcasts, you pretty much go through the years and the decades because it's been such a crazy ride for you. So why don't we just go back and just recount that for listeners right now to get caught up?
That sounds great. Yeah, I hope that something I say, I always pray before a podcast that something I say, something I convey resonates with someone else. There are millions and millions of sufferers out there, and they feel broken brain. They feel like they're broken, that their life is broken. And I definitely felt that from a very early age. I used to start my story at the diagnosis between 12 and 14, but I was very ill prior to that. I recognize now, looking back at who I was as a very young girl, that I just wasn't well. My earliest memories go back to 3 years old, 4 years old, 5 years old. I was anxious and I was sad. And that was the overarching element to my life. Everything that I approached as a young child just came from that brokenness. It was the 70s. Everything nutritionally was changing. And I also reflect back on that in my life, drawing correlation and causation of what possibly could have been going on with me biochemically, brain chemically, that could have contributed to me being the way that I was. Because we know in the 70s, everything went fat-free, everything of animal products went out the window, everything became heart-healthy grains, everything became pasta, spaghetti, noodles, margarine, no eggs, no butter. If you had eggs in your fridge, they were in a yellow carton of cholesterol-free, yellow-colored egg whites, egg beaters. That's the only eggs that were around, if you had them at all. So there's a lot of correlations that I can draw, clear back then, but that's who I was as a toddler, as a youngster, as a kindergartner going to school. I was thin also and frail, and I went through a lot of infections, viral and bacterial. They got misdiagnosed. I was on many multiple antibiotics at 8, 9, 10 years old, when doctors didn't know quite what was wrong with me, but I just kept displaying these flu-like symptoms, and they would throw antibiotics at it. And if one didn't work, they didn't do any testing. Well, let's just try another one. Obviously, that one's not going to work. So it was just kind of a firestorm of things that were going on. And I don't know exactly how much damage my gut incurred from the 70s diet of just eating plates full of pasta with nothing else day after day after day, and oatmeal and rice and nothing else. And what combination that happened with all of those antibiotics. I can speculate, I'm sure, that the damage that happened, that did not help any. That was just fuel to the fire of my already mental illness that was starting, and then every subsequent year and every subsequent decade was further madness. More diagnoses occurred, more symptoms occurred, more devastation, more descent into madness. So as a toddler up until 9 or 10, I was overrun with depression, anxiety, and already some OCD-like features. I can remember lying awake in bed and having to body check the exact count of what I did with each muscle on each side of my body. I couldn't relax and go to sleep unless I did the same thing on both sides. And that translated into my physical world also. I had to check locks. I had to go back and check them again. I had to count how many steps it took me to get to the doorway and make sure it was the same number of steps back. I was starting to be so obsessive in my own thoughts, and it wasn't something that I was in control of, and it wasn't something that I was bringing on myself. It was just overtaking me. So by the time I was 12, and I went through an 8 to 12 week severe battle with mononucleosis, where I was out of school and on 10 different antibiotics, and it was misdiagnosed, and then it was finally tested for. And of course, it's a virus. Antibiotics are going to do nothing but harm you when you're dealing with a case of mono. So there's that. My anxiety ramped up so much that at 12, I was diagnosed with an ulcer. It was actually a bleeding ulcer, and I was on acid-reducing medications for that, but that shows how bad my anxiety was. I couldn't go through a day without crying. It would be tears over not feeling perfect enough, not feeling worthy enough of love, not feeling like I did well enough in school, and my friends didn't like me, my teachers didn't like me. I was just worried about everyone's approval of me. And then that's where the self-punishment and the self-hatred part of mental illness began for me. I could find nothing within myself that was worthy and redeeming, and this is where the anorexia started. I began to wish to be smaller, skeletal, feeling like that was what I deserved. That was the only thing I was worthy of, was to punish myself by the drive to starve and to slowly reduce myself into nothing, into not being on this earth anymore. A year into self-starvation, and I was diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder. I was hearing audible male voices screaming not only harm to me, but very psychotic messages and delusions that I would slip into to harm others, to harm my family, to harm my friends. And the way that I tried to deal with that was to turn it on myself. That was the only way I could stop myself from following through with what these voices were telling me to do, or what they were telling me others were going to harm me, was to turn it inward on myself. And that's what I did. And then that led into the diagnosis of OCD, morphing into a very severe form of cutting, where I was cutting my arms and legs, and a severe form of hair pulling called Trichotillomania, where I was pulling scalp hair, eyebrows, eyelashes, to deal with the overarching stress of the voices screaming at me, the anorexia, the clinical depression, the severe anxiety, the panic attacks. It's very difficult to explain if you've not loved someone who has an addiction to cutting, or you yourself have not experienced it. It isn't something that is a habit that you can just walk away from. I promised myself every day when I awoke that I can control my hands. I can stop doing this anytime I want to. I should have bodily control. But within 48 hours, the incessant feeling like I was crawling out of my skin unless I succumbed to this would overtake me, and I would find myself on the bathroom floor with the door closed so that no one would see what I was doing, and cutting my arms and legs. And what happens for those who have not had someone in their life or not experienced it, there is a release that is felt when that cut is made. I know that it is insane, and it is, but that is the feeling that happens, that for that brief moment when the hair is pulled or when the cut is made, there is a release of everything that's pent up, and for that brief moment you feel calm. And like I said, it's very difficult to explain. I liken it to when someone talks about purging with bulimia. At the very 5 seconds that they are vomiting, they feel a calm, they feel a release. Of course, it doesn't last, but it's that same biochemical neurological reaction that happens when that cut is made. That's the only way that I can try to share it so that someone who is on the outside can try to understand what this is like in the mind of someone who is not well. So all of these things are going on. And my family is hidden from this as a teenager at first because it's easy to cut out meals where no one is around. I skip breakfast and say, well, I'll eat a big lunch at school, so that appeases my mom. At lunch, I tell my friends at school I ate a big breakfast, so I'm not hungry, so that appeases my friends at school. And then you get to the supper meal, and that goes along okay for a while, but the farther you get into mental illness, the farther that this is nowhere near a diet where you lose 5 or 10 pounds and okay, I'm good. I'm happy with myself now. That's not what this is. Anorexia is not a diet. Anorexia is not something that you choose to do and then stop. It is a mental illness, and it holds the highest mortality rate of all psychiatric conditions. It is not something that you walk away from. And even those who live the rest of their lives, they feel that they claim that they are in recovery, unless they've experienced actual ketogenic metabolic brain healing the way that I have. They live the rest of their life in fear of a relapse. They live the rest of their life still counting calories, still having foods that they're afraid of, still afraid to gain weight, still plagued with body dysmorphia, still plagued with the drive to starve. They have learned how to survive. They've learned how to live, but it's not actual freedom. It's not that is completely gone and healed in their brain. And that is what I want for other sufferers, not only for anorexia, but every other mental illness that I was plagued with, that you can walk in freedom. My first inpatient experience was at 16. I had lost enough weight that my family was now noticing, and they were coming to me sometimes with concern and compassion, and sometimes with frustration, that you need to stop this, you need to do something, you need to turn this around. At that time, in 1985, 86, there were quite a number of inpatient eating disorder units in Ohio hospitals. And we, of course, believed and trusted the medical system that this was going to fix me, that we were going to make the sacrifice of me being away from my family and them being away from me, but in the long run, it was going to save my life, and I was going to walk out of there whenever it was time to go home. I would walk out of there well, healed. Not really what happens, and that is not what happens to, I would say, 99% of those who are succumbed to this, whether it be by voluntary choice signing yourself in, or whether it be by court order, or you're under 18 and your family places you there without your consent. But they place you there anyway because this is supposed to be a life-saving treatment. All I can say is that it kept me alive. It was very traumatic, that first experience. I look back on it now, and The reason I look back on it now is because nothing has changed. I have visited inpatient hospitals now, and the things that I experienced then are still going on now. Nothing has changed. The protocols have not changed. So for me, I was in a double lockdown unit, which meant that I not only could not go outside and walk around or leave my hospital room to even walk the hallways, I was in a second lockdown unit that was locked to that wing of the hospital and not exposed to the rest of the hospital. Now, I understand the reasoning. This is the mental illness ward. And also on top of that, these are individuals who are underweight, and they're not wanting us to expel any more calories or energy than we have to because we are in jeopardy of a heart attack or a stroke or some other catastrophic event that's going to take us down. But it's traumatic to be strapped to your hospital bed where you cannot even go to the restroom without being watched and your urine output measured. And the only way you can leave your bed is if they undo the straps and then they strap you to a wheelchair and you're taken to wherever, whether it be testing, meals, the shower, doctor's appointments, therapy, psychiatrist's office. This is the way it goes. And like I said, I understand the reasoning, understand the protocol, but it doesn't make it any less traumatizing. You can end up with a really bad case of PTSD from being in a hospital setting like that. The first thing that happened to me, and for many others then and now, is a nasogastric feeding tube is inserted. And you're fed up your nose and down your throat into your stomach with this lovely, unnutritious concoction of canola oil, soy, and high fructose corn syrup. Here you go. It's literally them opening up cans of Boost and Ensure. Choose your poison, chocolate, strawberry, vanilla, and pouring it into the tube that's supposed to be giving you total nutrition. And it's the farthest thing from the truth. 3 meals, 3 snacks, 6 times a day, this is pumped into you. And the inflammation from those ingredients, the bodily and brain inflammation, the anxiety that those 3 ingredients cause on top of a person that's already extremely ill is abuse. I'm just going to call it like it is. But doctors refuse to believe that nutrition and what you consume affects your brain, affects your mental state. So for anorexia, all they care about is calories. All they care about is the weight on the scale. And this is how they deem when you're ready to go home and how they decide to say on your chart that you're well. Putting weight on you through carbs and sugar and seed oil does not a well person make. It puts weight on you, it puts fat on you, and not good fat, not brain healing cholesterol saturated fat. This is fat that's being made from seed oils and sugar and refined everything. So you put on weight but your mental state is either the same or worse. There is no improvement whatsoever in your mental state. And when the feeding tube comes out, then you're expected to eat what is brought to you on a tray, whether it still be in your private room or in a group dining room with everyone else that's in that same wing. And depending on the philosophy of the hospital that you're in, many that I've experienced, 99% of them are plant-based. So there's not going to be any whole animal food on your tray. It's going to be beans and rice to combine to make what they consider to be a complete protein, and it's going to be peanut butter and wheat bread. And the rest of what's on your tray is what you would, as an anorexic, consider fear foods. It's pies and cakes and icing and pancakes and waffles and muffins and chocolate and pizza and lasagna and all of these things that are high calorie that we have cut out of our diet because the mental illness tells us to. And this is how the doctors gauge whether or not we're well enough to go home. And it's not even a subtlety. It is talked about in every therapy session, in every private and group session. It's talked about when the trays of food are put before you. It's talked about openly. Prove to us that you can eat this. We will say you're well and no longer anorexic, and you can go home. That is their only criteria. And so there's the food, the meal side of it. And in my case, most of the hospitals that I've been in, the CEOs, the board of directors that are overseeing what everyone eats in the hospital, what's available at the cafeteria for the public, it's all coming from the standpoint of vegan / plant-based / vegetarian from the Seventh-day Adventist Church, who we know historically has had major influence over the trajectory of how our nutrition guidelines have gone, the food pyramid, and what is promoted as being healthy. So that's the physical and the meal side of it. The psychological side of this, when you're inpatient, is you're in group therapy, you have counselors, you have an occupational therapist, a physical therapist, and you have a team of doctors around you that are your primary care physicians. You are assigned a head nurse to check on you. And of course, you have then a board certified psychiatrist that is doing half of his healing with pharmaceuticals and the other half with talk therapy. Let's talk about your childhood. Let's talk about your traumas. Let's talk about all of these things that we think are what is the cause of why you're experiencing your mental health issues. And don't get me wrong, talk therapy is important. People have trauma in their life, in their background. I'm the first one to say that ketogenic and a carnivore diet is not going to heal your past trauma, but it is going to heal your brain and make you be in the highest metabolic brain functional standpoint, so that when you do have talk therapy and when you do delve into the trauma of whatever you've experienced in your life as a child or as an adult, your now functioning healed brain will be able to process it. And you will be able to, as a healed brain, non-broken brain individual hopefully be able to put those traumas to rest in the back burner, process them, and go on to live a thriving life. They don't take them away, but it helps you tremendously, because when your brain is not functioning right, when you are struggling with mental illness, no matter what your diagnosis is, what your brain needs in order to process this is to be able to take in new information, to learn new skills. And that takes neural plasticity. And that is from the amino acids in our foods that supply the over 100 neurotransmitters in our brain. And if you don't have that, you don't have the nutrition part of that going on, you can't learn new skills. You can't talk about and process what traumas you've been through as a child or as an adult. There's a level of brain fog, a level of brain dysfunction that is so strong that no amount of talk therapy will allow you to move forward. You're just stuck in this cycle of talk about it, cry, feel a little better, feel worse, talk about it, cry, feel a little bit. It's just a cycle that just is 2 steps forward and 3 steps back, because your nutrition is not supporting a healthy brain. At 6 weeks in this inpatient experience, I was allowed to go home, and nothing had changed. On the ride home, I'm thinking about how I'm going to cut out meals, how I'm going to change the meal plan already. You know, nothing has changed. I'm riding home in the car, and relapse has already occurred. You know. So this is how I was. I was under care. I was under all of these teams of doctors. And when one med didn't work, I was on 3 or 4 meds at a time. They would throw a couple for the schizoaffective. I'd be on Seroquel. I'd be on Haldol. There'd be several that were tried for depression and anxiety. Paxil, Effexor, Elavil, Prozac, all of those, Wellbutrin, things for anxiety specifically, Xanax, Valium. All of these were a combo. They would tweak the dose, take one away, throw another one in there. So over the course of about 30 years, I was on and off a dozen. None of them ever made any reduction at all in how I was feeling mentally. And in fact, my mental illnesses continued to deteriorate and get worse. And the side effects from all of these meds are horrendous. The side effects are unlivable. And at 30 years in, 10 years even prior to my finding actual healing, I titrated myself off, because I functioned worse on them than I functioned off of them. I was already out of touch with reality because of the schizoaffective disorder. I was also into paranoia and delusions and the anorexia and the starvation, and I was so skeletal. I was teetering right around 70 pounds most of those years at 5'9". And the side effects were just horrendous. I was sedated. I was sedated to the point where I would just sit and stare. I couldn't get myself to be present with anyone that I was with. And that made my life even further unlivable. So into my 20s, I attempted to go to college for 2 years and had to drop out. Because of my perfectionism, I'm not anymore, but back then I managed to use all the energy that I had to make very, very good grades. It wasn't a grade issue. It was a self-punishment and a starvation and a fear for my life issue. I was blacking out in classes. I was blacking out in the shower. I was blacking out in my dorm because of starvation. And it was starting to get on the radar of the resident advisor, the dorm mother, the clinic, that I either needed to quit or they were going to demand that I take a leave of absence. And so I stopped college after 2 years and went home, attempted to work part-time. I needed to rest a lot because of my weight. I continued, I didn't resume treatment, but I got back into more heavy treatment that I wasn't receiving while I was at college, even though I was still under treatment. But I threw myself into whatever anybody said might help me. And I had teams of doctors still into my 20s. This is when I met my husband to be, and we got married, and he knew what he was signing up for. You take those vows for better or for worse, and he knew it was going to be worse, and in sickness and in health, and he knew it was going to be a lot of sickness. But he loved me unconditionally and still does to this day. We've just celebrated 30 years together. And thankful for the years that we've had, but also acknowledging that only 6 of those years have been with the wife that he has now, that is completely functional, completely healed, completely well, joyful, strong. So most of our life together was illness and sickness and struggle. I went downhill physically during that 3rd decade. All 6 mental illness diagnoses are still there. Nothing has ever reduced any of those symptoms. And now my physical being is literally falling apart. Literally falling apart. Up to this point in my 40s, I had now had severe osteoporosis for almost 3 decades. And now it's rearing its ugly head. Now I have chronic bone pain all the time. I can't walk without pain. And now I end up in my 40s with 5 fractures within 5 years. I spent more time in bed being housebound in casts, braces, crutches, non-weight bearing on my arms and my legs than I spent being able to walk around. Those 5 years were horrendous. And I also had medical complications on top of that, whether it be for eating disorders, mental illness, or the physical surgeries I'm going to describe. I was hospitalized 7 times in 15 years. And I had some surgeries that were very devastating. And the worst one was when I was 40. I had severe pelvic pain, and I was already dealing with a lot of pelvic pain, which I then came to understand during my healing was oxalate toxicity. that I was being told that these illnesses that I was diagnosed with could not be healed, that they were incurable. And we can talk about that later. All things oxalate. This pelvic pain that I was experiencing, I assumed was just an offshoot of that. So I had been learning to ignore the other pain that I was feeling. So for a long time, I ignored this also. And it continued to get worse. What ended up happening was I had not only wasted away under severe sarcopenia, muscle wasting, on all of my external muscles. Your body starts to eat itself, literally. And that was what was happening internally. All of my internal musculature that is meant to be there to hold organs in place was wasted away. And this incredible pain that I was feeling was internal organs that had prolapsed. And I went to go get help when they prolapsed externally. There was no denying at that point that I needed emergency help. So I had to have this big surgery where 3 specialists tag teamed off of each other in a 12-hour surgery. I was opened up horizontally, and they each came in and did their part to either remove the damaged organs or resection those damaged organs, or simply try to put those organs back in place. And that was an experience in recovery, in pain tolerance. I'm also allergic to all opiates, and there was nothing that they could offer me to mitigate this pain. It was bad. And because I'm not well mentally, because the anorexia is raging on, I'm trying to recover from surgery by not feeding myself. Because I could not succumb to the OCD that I was experiencing of hours and hours of cardio during recovery, I then took it out more on myself and starved more because I couldn't exercise it off. I couldn't deal with the food that I was eating by burning the calories off, so then I ate even less. So I was subsisting on a cup of chicken broth, maybe. I would heat it up in order to stay warm because I was so cold all of the time. And on a good day, maybe I'd throw in a cup of spinach. Maybe I'd throw in a cup of celery. 300 calories at the most.
I'm sure the lack of fiber was really the problem there that you needed to fix. So that was great.
Yeah, it was great. It was just great. Yeah, and during that time, when I would try to even do what I would consider better, I would fall back to what was taught to me, which was eat oatmeal, eat sweet potato, eat white potato, eat salads, eat rice cakes. That was all I could do on the times when I was trying to do better. At the end of all of this, when I learned what I needed to learn and embarked on this journey of actually healing, I had amassed 35 years of not eating any protein or fat. Not a chicken leg, not an egg, not a piece of cheese, not anything. for 35 years. This was the state of my brain. This was the state of my body underneath this. And I shouldn't be alive. I should not be alive. My heart had shrunk half its size. My cholesterol, total cholesterol, was less than 80. You know, that's why I'm so against statins. Doctors are putting people on statins to get their cholesterol down under 100. Do you know what happens to a brain when their cholesterol is getting down below 90, 80, 70? Your brain doesn't function. The brain fog and the cognitive decline is horrific, no matter how it happens, whether it be through starvation or chemically lowering it with statins. This is a disaster. This is horrible. My cholesterol was that way. My blood pressure was 70/50 on a good day. You know, I couldn't stand up without blacking out. My thyroid was tanked. My hormones were tanked. I had all of these female issues. I've been diagnosed with interstitial cystitis. Felt like I had glass shards in all of my pelvic area. I had vulvodynia. I had all of these things going on, overactive bladder, painful bladder spasms, just all of these things going on that all these doctors just said, this is just the way you're going to have to be. There's no cure for it. You know, we can try different treatments. We can do some invasive treatments and flush your bladder out with some acid and some herbs and some water infusions that we think will soothe your bladder, but there's nothing really we can do about it. You know, it turns out it was all that spinach and celery every day forming all kinds of oxalate crystals, you know, in all of my female areas that thankfully are completely gone. So, you know, that surgery was horrible. And in a fully functional brain, you go through physical trauma like that, that's your rock bottom. You know, that's your wake up call. That's all right. It's time to turn this around. It's time to do something. This is my rock bottom. But when you're dealing with someone who is mentally ill, sorry to say, there's no rock bottom. There's nothing that can happen to you physically, whether it be through illness, surgery, hospitalization, where you find yourself on the side of a road because you're experiencing a psychotic break from schizophrenia. There's nothing that goes on that sparks your brain to say, okay, this is my rock bottom. That does not happen with mental illness. So my last psychiatrist of the 12 that I had over the course of 3 decades, this was when I titrated myself off of my meds. He fired me. He said, don't come back. And that was the 6th psychiatrist I'd had over the course of those years that threw their hands up and said, we can't help you. You're treatment resistant. Half the time you're not compliant because you won't sign a contract to gain 3 pounds a week. There's nothing we can do. We've already run all the meds. You just have to accept that this is the way you're going to be for the rest of your life. Your family's just going to have to accept this. But this is who you are. This is what you're going to have to live with for however long you live. And then when I asked him to help me with a schedule to titrate myself slowly off of the meds I was on because I was constantly complaining about the side effects, he basically said, hell to the no, you know, don't ever go off your meds. I don't care what side effects you're experiencing. I'm not going to help you do that. So I no longer was then without a psychiatrist, which wasn't helping me anyway. We'd already talked to death everything that I'd experienced as a child, and that wasn't helping me. So I found a titration chart online and titrated myself off. And that was a difficult 3 years. It took 3 years to go off of them and to feel like I wasn't crawling out of my skin. It took a long time. I have a lot of sympathy, a lot of empathy for everyone that we encounter on X, on Instagram, on Facebook, who are either actively talking about trying to go off of meds and how they are feeling and how difficult it is, or also not having the support of a doctor helping them go off of them. I've got a soft place in my heart for those that are dealing with that. It's very difficult. It is. In a perfect world, you would have a doctor that says, okay, I understand and I know that these side effects are life altering, and let's see what else we can do and I'll help you go off of them. But most of them are not open to that. They're certainly not open to nutrition interventions, and they're not open to de-prescribing. They're only open to more prescribing. So I got off the meds, dealing with all these fractures, looking at a lifetime of fractures. And these weren't traumas. I didn't fall off a roof. I didn't fall down the stairs. This was the state of the health of my bones from starvation and over-exercise, which in itself is a mental illness because I couldn't stop doing that. That was part of the anorexia and the OCD. So I was looking at the rest of my life with fractures and looking at the rest of my life with what surgery am I going to have to endure again? What's going to go wrong next? I knew traditional treatment was not going to help me. I knew that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. I'd given the medical establishment 35 years of my life, and nothing had changed. It wasn't going to do any good to find a new traditional treatment doctor. It wasn't. I knew something had to be wrong with my brain. I had been weight restored and relapsed, and weight restored and relapsed, and then on the subsistence of maybe 80 or 90 pounds, and then relapsed. Weight gain on carbs and sugars, no matter what I weighed, it did not help me mentally at all. So I knew that was not going to help me either. Gaining weight on what I was allowing myself to eat, which I thought was healthy. I still couldn't imagine nutrition being a component of this, but that was who I was then. I happened to find a couple of books at the library by an author named Julia Ross called The Mood Cure and The Diet Cure. And this was the first time in my life that I had ever read or heard that protein and fat are more than just for gym bros, are more than just for gaining muscle, that those macronutrients are what our brain runs on. And if it's deficient, if it's lacking, if it's eliminated, you're in trouble. You are in serious trouble. And I poured through those books and I'm like, what? I was dumbfounded. I really was. I wasn't on board with trying it yet. I couldn't imagine that this was true. I am a researcher. I am a knowledge person. I am a wisdom seeker. I needed more. I needed more information. So I began to look online. I began to search on YouTube. I began to pour through TED Talks. That's when I found my heroes, Dr. Georgia Ede and Dr. Chris Palmer. Their early writings, their early information on all of these social media outlets and just to read articles online, when you Google it, were backing up what I had read in those two books. What does the brain need to function optimally? Well, the brain has neurotransmitters. What do your neurotransmitters need to function? What does it use as the building blocks to make those neurotransmitters? Well, it uses amino acids. What are the best amino acids out there? Animal foods. This was my light bulb moment. I still couldn't imagine that it could help me, but it was a light bulb moment in the sense that that was what I had cut out 35 years prior. There are some people who suffer from anorexia who solely go by calories. They still consume some animal products, maybe some dairy, maybe an egg, maybe a tiny bit of chicken, as long as they're under the calorie count that they've set for themselves for that day. I was different. I cut those 2 macronutrients out completely. And so that's what got my attention. I was not someone who was still consuming a small amount of it and I could just pass it off and say, yeah, okay, whatever. I'm eating animal products. It can't be that. That's why it was so eye-opening to me. I went to my husband. We started talking about this. He was all for it. He's, works in the agriculture business. He grew up in the country. He grew up on meat and potatoes. That was how I cooked for him. I'm the cook of the house. Even though I had cut those out of my diet, my everyday foods, I was still cooking this, what he loved most. So he was all for it. He's been trying to tell me for years, you need to eat some meat. You need. And I would just get defensive. I would just get, but this book says I should be able to get everything I need on whole grain bread and some spinach, and I don't feel good. So I'll just make some more smoothies and I'll just drink some more spinach and I'll feel better. And, this is telling me that if I don't feel good, I just need to double down and do more.
And that's where the damage comes in from just the constant messaging that we get that you can be your healthiest self if you just eat more and more plants and all the colors of the rainbow.
Yeah.
And even on a less extreme side, the balanced diet. Ooh, the balanced diet.
Oh,
well, what other animal in the world has a balanced diet of different things? No, they have a single food that's the best for them, and it helps them operate the best. So humans are no different. We are animals just like all the rest, and meat is that food that works best for us and helps our brain. And
yeah, exactly.
I won't jump the gun there. You're the one to learn that more than anyone from what you went through. So I'm excited to hear finally the happy ending.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm ready.
At that same time that I found Georgia Ede and Chris Palmer, I also found Dr. Sean Baker and Dr. Ken Berry and Dr. Anthony Chafee. So I'm combining all of this together, but it's like, I'm not a normal person of normal weight with no mental illness. I can't just, okay, I'm going to trade my pizza for a ribeye. I'm not a person who has the ability to trade one plate of food, one whole day's worth of food for this other food of beef, bacon, butter, and eggs. How am I going to do this? How? If I'm going to explore that this could actually help me, even 10%, even 20%, it was never on my radar that I would ever be better, that I would ever be healed or be well. I was just trying to live the next 10 years without committing suicide, without making my family cry at night, not knowing whether I was going to wake up the next morning because I'd had a heart attack in my sleep. I was just trying to prolong my life a little bit. So like, how am I going to do this? How am I going to do this? For me, I had to pay attention to my propensity to relapse. If I even ate one bite of a sweet potato more than what I thought I deserved, the next 2 days I wouldn't eat anything at all to make up for that extra bite of sweet potato. This was how I operated. I knew myself. I knew that this was going to be difficult. So I didn't want to sabotage it. I wanted to try this, but it had to go slow. And it was very slow. I have a term for it now. We call it reverse dieting, where you add small amounts of food to what you're already eating to slowly increase your energy input or your calories, whatever you want to call them, to raise your metabolism, to get things working right, to get your gut working right, to not shock your system into some sort of refeeding syndrome where you feel worse before you feel better. So my way of doing this was coming up with the meat that was the most bland, the most benign, which happens to be fat-free chicken breast. So that's where I started. I promised myself to eat an ounce, 2 tablespoons of chicken every day. What I was hoping was if I did that for a week, somehow I would get used to it. And my estimation, my gauge of whether I was going to be used to it or not was whether after 7 days of doing this, I didn't sit at the kitchen table and cry while I was trying to eat this, which is what was happening. It was the most difficult thing to do. Voices are screaming at me. You don't deserve to eat this. This food is poisonous. The only way that you are going to live the rest of this life is to listen to us voices, and you need to drive your car off an overpass. You need to go harm the person at the store that's looking at you funny. I'm trying to eat this chicken while all this is going on in my head 24 hours a day. The only time I would ever escape this is to sleep. So you get to a point where you just don't want to wake up anymore. The body dysmorphia is off the charts. You know, I get a glance of myself in a mirror and I see somebody who's obese. How dare you eat this ounce of chicken? You're going to be worse. All of this is going on. It's very difficult, but I'm committed to this. And my husband is supporting me. And I go to him crying and he looks at me and he says, "What else have you got to go back to? What? You can't live another year this way. What else is there? You have to go forward. There's nothing else." So I plunged forward. And thankfully, the miracles started to happen. Not that I felt better, but that I got used to it. And that 1 ounce became 2, the 2 became 3, the 3 became 4. And I slowly built up what I was eating each day. Still eating a cup of spinach, still eating a cup of celery in there with it, because I didn't yet know about oxalates. It's just the tip of the iceberg of understanding that certain foods heal and that certain foods harm. So I'm adding this meat in on top of that. 3 to 6 months in, I'm really listening to Dr. Berry and Dr. Baker and Dr. Chafee, and they're talking about, yes, all meat is great. If you're healed and you have no issues anymore, you know, expand your meat, pork, beef, chicken, you know, all of those, you're going to do great. But if you're really, really ill, you're going to find a benefit in beef only. And so that was my driving force to change from chicken over to beef. And so I successfully traded the 8 ounces of chicken that I was eating for 8 ounces of beef. And at the 6-month mark, I was noticing changes. I was noticing that my anxiety was lower. My depression wasn't quite as severe. The OCD and the cutting and the hair pulling sessions that were chronic and every day, I could now go a few days in between and weren't as often. I was noticing changes. And so that was the motivation to continue on. Not that I ever thought that I was going to do this for 30 days or 90 days. I never said that. Oh, I'm going for 30 days. If I'm not any better, I'm going to quit. I had nothing to quit to. This was it. I didn't have an end point. I didn't set myself up to say I was going to stop this at some point. So I just kept going. And I was able to go from ground beef to whole cuts of chuck roast in the crock pot, which gave me the fat profile that I needed. Because I'm still not healed of the anorexia. I'm still not a person who can take a jar of tallow and eat a spoonful of tallow. There's no way. I was still fat phobic. I was still, I can't do that. But I started to integrate these cuts of beef that already had it in it. And if I could get myself to eat it, I would have the benefits of it without eating spoonfuls of fat, because I just wasn't there yet. I just wasn't there. The brain healing hadn't happened enough yet. So at the 6-month mark, the 9-month mark, that was when I started learning about oxalates. And we didn't have the term the lion diet then yet, but beef, salt, and water. I went off of the spinach. I went off of the celery. Learned about Sally Norton at that point. Her book had not come out yet, but I found, early writings in there. Learned about how to keep one bite of something in there so that you would mitigate dumping, so that you didn't have oxalate dumping syndrome going on, so that you didn't feel horrible before you felt better. I did that, not with spinach or celery, but I put a cup of black tea into my diet, which would keep the dumping away from all of those years of all of those high oxalate vegetables. So now I was on about 12 ounces to a pound of whole cuts of beef and nothing else. And at the 9-month mark, more changes happened. The voices that I've been plagued with for my entire life, I don't have memories without them. I don't have memories of them being reduced. Those voices were now in another room with the door closed. Still there, but dimmer, quieter. And I'm like, what is this? What is happening? Anxiety is further gone. I feel this calm that I've never experienced in my life. About 6 ounces, 8 ounces into a steak, into chuck roast. I'll be sitting there, and it was something that I physically felt, because I'd gone so many years without that. It's a life-changing experience to be sitting there halfway through a steak and put your fork down, and you can just feel calmness come over you that I've never experienced in my entire life. And you sit there and you look at this steak and you thank God for nourishing food that you'll never take for granted again. That if I can feel this way, even for a moment, hoping that it would happen again, because it goes back and forth as you're healing. Thankfully, it comes and stays and doesn't go away anymore once you're healed. And then another 3 months, at the 12-month mark, everything was gone. The voices are not quieter, they're gone. The anxiety is completely gone. The panic attacks are gone. The depression is completely gone. Everything used to be gray. Sunsets, sunrises, everything was dark, gray, sad. Everything was now in living color. And what we talked about before, that anorexia can be better because you're learning somehow new skills to try to control it. It was completely gone. For almost 7 years now, I have no fear of a relapse. There is no way that I can relapse because it's not looming over my shoulder. It's not there anymore. I am able to eat anything I want. There are no fear foods. There's not, if I wanted to sit down to whatever anybody put in front of me, I could eat it. I have no fear of weight gain since I've gained 50 pounds. All of those features are completely gone. So there's no chance of any kind of relapse. There's no chance of anything going on. It's just up from here. And people try to come at me and say, well, that first year that you say that you healed, your anorexia is better because you gained weight. Well, at the end of that first year was my brain healing, my metabolic brain dysfunction healing. I hadn't gained any weight yet. I was still 75 pounds. This was all brain healing. And then once that was healed, once all 6 mental illnesses were completely healed, it was go time. It was time to rebuild my body. I spent the next 2 years rebuilding, lifting heavy, reversing osteoporosis, reversing my hypothyroid condition, developing protocols to live the rest of my life strong and not ever have a fracture again, not ever have thyroid issues again. So I am in awe still every day that I wake up, every meal that I enjoy, every freedom of life that I have now, because it's changed every part of me. It's not just a plate of food. It has changed who I am. That person that I was is no longer with us. She's not here anymore. I talk about her like she's the third person I can remember. It's not been that many years ago, but I'm just so changed as a person, and everything has changed. My relationships, my life, what I'm able to do physically during the day, being on an open playing field, an equal playing field with everyone around me. No one needs to be my caretaker anymore. It's just changed every part of me. And I am passionate to come alongside anyone that wants to embark on this also. And I get the privilege of doing that every day, of counseling and talking to people and talking them through what's their next step, what's the next step to take to feel better, to be better. It's just an amazing way of life, an amazing feeling.
Next step is more beef.
Yes.
That's what I'm hearing. It's just unreal how universal this is, that people see improvement mentally with his diet. And I'm one of the people who always thought that I had good mental health. I felt like I could, get through life pretty well. I never dealt with depression or anxiety. And when I went to school, I had a lot of friends that had it really bad. So I had that view of how bad it could be. I felt really thankful my whole life that I didn't have that going on. But when I went on a carnivore diet last September in 2023, so, not that long ago, I felt a huge boost and I just felt so much better. And I was like, wow, and now all this research I'm doing now, hearing people coming from the depths of horrible situations, and then myself at the other side of the spectrum, like I thought I was doing well, and even I got a big increase. It's such a great reminder. This is, I think, the most important facet of the carnivore diet that, we're trying to get out there, is that this is going to fix your brain. How cool is that? You get to be happier, you get to be more motivated, have more energy. Life is easier to handle. Like you said, there's always going to be trauma in life and things that happen that are anxiety inducing, but the ability to handle it becomes so much easier when your brain is working at a high level. And this is a laughable example for me to pull out after your story, but one of the ones that I was just thinking about earlier today was, well, I've been thinking about this recently in general because I do a lot of traveling. And I remember way back in the day when I would have a flight day, when I had a big international flight with a couple of connecting flights, like I had to get my luggage in between the flights. And it just felt like, oh, there's so many things that could go wrong. That would always be a really stressful day, and I hated it. And I really just dreaded those big days where there's a lot of steps that you have to go through. And now, literally the only thing I've changed is the diet on Carnivore. It's like a big adventure day. Like, yeah, I get to listen to a lot of podcasts, and I get to, kind of go around, just make all these friends. I always talk to the people around me. It's like happy time. What used to be the bad day is now an even better day. And I'm sure that you can feel this way as well, especially compared to where you've been. Is I cannot put my finger on a single bad day I've had since I started this, a single like really down, sad day. It just doesn't happen. I have this ability to really, really be fully in the moment on the happy days. And if there's a hard day, if there's something bad is happening, you have more of this ability to sort of come out of body a little bit and look at the situation more objectively and figure out, what should I be doing here? Where should I be emotionally? You get like a whole second player in this game of being able to kind of exit your thoughts a little bit, which is the exact opposite of where you were completely trapped in this nightmare prison of your thoughts. Not to mention you could, the craziest part of all is just the voices. I've never heard such a vivid story of what that's like, and that is absolutely, cannot imagine how terrifying that is to have a man just yelling at you all the time that's not there, and just there's nothing you can do when that's happening. That must have just been absolutely terrifying. I'm so glad that you got through that.
I am too, and there are more than 20 million sufferers who have schizophrenia. And the thought of them being helped by a metabolic brain healing through nutrition is just insurmountable. And I know that they can be helped. I had suffered with this for 40 years, and there's no good treatments out there. There's just prescribing of medicines, and there's nothing else. And it's not right. Any sufferer, whether it be that dangerous and that severe, all the way to someone who feels like they're doing okay, but they still, have some anxiety and some depression. Every single person deserves to feel good every day. Every single person deserves to have a calm, working brain, to enjoy the gift of life that we've been given, to be contributors to society in a good way, to serve others, to love others, to help others, to be productive. Everyone deserves that right. And we have to keep talking about it. We have to keep spreading the message from one person to another. It's not going to come from the top down. It's not. We have to advocate for ourselves and for our friends and for our loved ones and for strangers we haven't met yet. We have to advocate for them and shout this from the rooftops. And that is why I feel so honored and so privileged to come alongside you and everyone else that has a voice, that has a podcast, that can get this message out there. You're changing lives. You are helping people by talking about this and by providing a platform and by asking questions and talking about these things and putting them out regularly every day with everyday people that have healed, and also the great doctors that you've interviewed already. That's what needs to happen, because that's how I found what ultimately helped me. I was searching, and thankfully, even back then, even 7 years ago, there was at least something that I could grab onto. Today, we still don't have support from the top echelons, the powers that be, but we have way more evidence out there, way more voices out there now than when I first started. And it's more easily accessible to search this out if you're looking. And we have to be ready to tell them about it. Now, just the other day, I was responding to a hater on Twitter, and someone who was in support of me and against the hater also posed a question to me that, why are you wasting your time? Why are you wasting your time replying to this person when you know they're against you? And I responded to this person, and I said, because 7 years ago, I was them. And because 7 years ago, I was you. If someone hadn't talked about this, I wouldn't have found an answer. And how are the sufferers going to know, whether it be physical illness or mental illness, how are they going to know unless we talk about it, unless we are a voice for them? If I just go off and live my healed life silently, that's not acceptable to me. That's hiding my healing. That's holding on to something that I don't have a right to hold on to. I have love for everyone out there that's dealing with any kind of illness. And if we don't share it, who's going to? Who's going to take the message to them and tell them that, hey, let's take a look at what you're eating, and have you ever thought about what you're eating might impact your illness? If we don't pose that question to them, who's going to tell them? If not us, who? That's why we have to talk about this.
Absolutely. And you mentioned earlier as well, just the significance of being able to be a productive member of society again after you come out of this hole, how every single human on earth needs to have that in order to, or at least to not drag down the people around them, like the family and friends. Just when you're in that boat of being needed to take care of, it's so hard to get ahead. I would say even more so for men. Like, it's so critical for men to just feel confident and able to pursue a mission in life. And speaking of just like the male problem, as we see, there's so much more increased aggression and crime and violence, and that is definitely lopsided toward men out there. You're talking in your story about how the voices in your head were literally telling you to do those things, how to do negative things to harm people. And it's just hard to fathom how many of these terrible tragedies we hear about are a result of people, whether it be hearing the voices or just having some mental issue in their brain is wrong. And this has definitely been a major change in just how I view all of these terrible things I hear about going on in the world across all levels. Is like, how much of this could be fixed if we just fixed people's diet and just gave them good nutrition and the information about what good nutrition is, because that's the first step here that we're still working on. We got a lot of work to do even for the first level. But like you said, there's never been a more exciting time because we have so much ability to share these stories all over the world, and people like Dr. Chafee and Ken Berry and Georgia Ede. I'm really glad you shouted her out, because for anyone out there looking for, mental health hope, she is so good at the brain side of things. She had this presentation, I forget what conference it was, but it's on YouTube. If you type in Georgia Ede, the brain needs meat, She did an awesome presentation. I send that to everybody. She breaks it all down. This is, like you said, this is not like a gym bro, like protein and fat are needed for everything in your body, especially your brain. Your brain is 60% fat. If you're not giving it fat, you're setting yourself up for a bad time. And there's no saying how that's going to manifest, because a lot of people's issues are quite different. I talked to Mimi Morgan recently. She's another awesome carnivore out there who had, like you, just a lifetime of just horrible health issues. Hers came out as Parkinson's. She was having like a lot of physical problems. If I remember correctly, she cognitively was pretty much there the whole time, but her body was really failing her. And for you, it was, started in the brain and went to your body as well. But I would agree with what you said as well, that the brain needs to be fixed first and foremost. And it's so clear that that needs fat. You need to just be eating protein and fat to feed that brain with the amino acids it needs, or else danger time. Something bad's going to happen. It's hard to say when it's going to happen or how it's going to show up, but you're not setting yourself on a strong foundation.
Yeah, and like you said, it manifests differently in different people. Look at all the autoimmune conditions that has just, those diagnoses have just skyrocketed. 20 years ago, I didn't know anyone who had Crohn's disease or multiple sclerosis or, or Hashimoto's. And within my own extended family, within the last 2 years, 5 people have been diagnosed with Crohn's disease, and they're all on steroids. They're all on anti-inflammatories. They all are on this special plant-based diet. They're all getting Remicade infusions. They've all been operated on to have parts of their damaged colon taken out. These autoimmune conditions that are the anti-nutrients in plants attacking organs, and of course, in the case of MS, it's attacking the myelin sheath around the nerves. And the myelin sheath is made from saturated fat. If you're not consuming it, it will go away in your body. And you end up with these diagnoses of all of these heartbreaking, debilitating, painful conditions. And maybe someone doesn't have the mental part of what I experienced, but whether it be body or brain or both, every single cell of your being needs protein and fat. Every single nerve ending, every single telomere, every single mitochondrial cell cannot function without those two. And it will manifest itself differently in every single person, but all roads lead back to metabolic health. They all can be addressed from that singular source. And to stand back and watch the healing take place of what happens to your body and your brain on a proper human diet is just mind-blowing. It's just phenomenal to sit and listen to everyone's stories of what has healed. It's amazing every single day.
And I especially love the style of testimonial you have, where you talk about how, as you increased the amount of meat that you were eating over time, very slowly, every one of the problems just slowly diminished right alongside it. It was perfectly correlated. And there's just no way to discount that is what caused the improvement. And the people on Twitter and the vegans on the internet are going to get so mad about that, because it literally just proves that when you make this simple change, when you eat the fatty meats, all the problems get better. There's no more, I mean, there's so many anecdotes out there, and I'm in the boat of like, don't even think, the studies are going to be so far behind on this. If we have a world to heal here, we need to actually talk to real people, and people need to be open to self-experimenting and listening to stories like yours, and going on podcasts like those with, Dr. Chafee and Ken Berry and Sean Baker. They're all having so many people's stories put together, because as you mentioned earlier, there's not going to be a top-down change here. This is too entrenched of a system. And this is one of the things that I've learned through many different rabbit holes. I always get attached to these disruptive movements. I think they're so fascinating, just watching people sort of from the grassroots rising up against a failing system. And this is the best example there is. Like, the medical system is so shot right now that they're just, it's unsalvageable in so many ways, but I'm still optimistic because we have all this power in our hands of starting from the bottom and just from a decentralized level of just helping people learn these things. We can fix it, and people will heal without needing that traditional medical system. It's not necessary anymore. We're going to make it obsolete, or much smaller at least. So it's only there for, what hospitals should be for, which is injuries and acute issues, and
Mhm.
not these lifelong chronic, you know, dragging people down for their decades of their entire life. That shouldn't be a thing. Like, that should be extremely rare. Like you said, like if we go back even just 25 years ago, let alone a century ago, or let alone thousands of years ago, people didn't have all these problems that we see today. It just didn't exist. And people are so stuck in this thought process that it's normal that everyone's just sick all the time and everyone has some sort of illness that they're battling. And we really just need to take a whole new approach at looking at this. And I think that's why so many people are more open than ever to these things that we're talking about. I don't know about you, but I'm getting less and less people over time looking at me like a crazy person when I start talking about this. And one of the reasons is because I have so many stories like yours, and you mentioned Crohn's as well. There's one of the guys I love out there is Kent Carnivore. He's on YouTube.
Yeah,
I'm not sure if you watched him.
I have. Yes, I have. He
He
is
is
amazing.
fantastic. He does a great job making these movies, breaking it all down. But what he also does is he talked through his own story of ulcerative. I think it was ulcerative colitis. It was either that or Crohn's, and he went through the experience. For those who haven't heard, I'll make sure to link him in the show notes. But he had his whole colon removed from eating plant based for so many years of his life. And of course, the doctor said, "Oh, you need to eat more fiber, more fiber, more plants, more plants." So he kept doing that. He kept veganing harder, like they say, and eventually it just destroyed his whole gut. And now he has a colostomy bag for the rest of his life. And so after that procedure, he then found out carnivore after the fact. So, it what a crazy story. First of all, just like, man, imagine being in this guy's shoes, like learning about this after you'd already gone through such a crazy surgery like that. But he has such a great attitude about it. He really just says, like, what happened happened. I want to help people not have to go through that. And what he does is, he, like, in the same way that you really watch the meat intake over time increasing your happiness and just decreasing all the bad, he has done experiments on himself now that he has a bag attached to his body where he will eat different types of food and see what comes out, because now you're able to do that. So he would eat, you know he would just demolish a whole steak and nothing comes out in the bag, or a little bit of liquid. And
Mhm.
then he'll eat a piece of broccoli or pineapple, or name your vegetable, celery. He would try these different plants, and it would come out in the bag untouched, like still have the bite marks in it. It just literally, it your body did nothing to break it down. And when we've learned this as carnivores as well, that our body is more, or our gut is more acidic than even lions or wolves. We're like up there with vultures. We are extremely carnivorous, and we cannot digest plants at all, which is why it's just bonkers that this is still the advice people are being given, to eat more fiber and these plants that do nothing, let alone as you were being fed the canola oil and the soy. Oh God, it's the worst thing we could give. And this is a good transition back to a part of your story I was going to ask about earlier, which is, you've gone back to these mental wards now that you've healed yourself on your own, and you're now on the other side of this. You're able to go back into these places and see your old life, and see your old self, and these poor people that are in these institutions being fed the same garbage, being told the same lies. And I can only imagine it must be so frustrating. And how does it feel for you to go back into these places and see these people being treated the same way and being given the same like non-solutions?
It's extremely frustrating. I go into these situations armed with knowledge and tricks and tips for the family to, because it's one thing to tell them that the NG feeding tube ingredients are toxic, but it's another thing to say, I have a solution for you. I've researched this, and there is a total nutrition out there that is beef-based, that is whey-based, that does not include seed oils, but you need to request it from your doctor or from your loved one's eating disorder unit specialist, and have the prescription changed from what they're feeding them. But there are two products out there, but you need to, you need to insist on it. You need to advocate for your loved one that this is going to be better for them. This is actually going to have nutrition in it to help your brain. What ends up equally more frustrating is trying to get the family to understand, to even have the courage to ask, because they are still under the guise of, we just need to put weight on my daughter. She just needs to gain weight and she'll be okay. I don't need to talk to the doctor about this. The different stuff, different ingredients in that liquid is not going to make a difference. So there's the first hurdle. And then after I convince them to talk to the doctor and ask them or demand that they change this and order a different feeding tube ingredients, then you are faced with a doctor that looks at you and says, that is ridiculous. Only thing that counts is total calories. We need to up their calories to 4,000 to 6,000 calories, per day. And this is the best way to do it, because the ingredients that's in this have FDA approval. The quiet part is not spoken out loud, that it's Nestle that's getting a kickback from this. But they'll come back and say, this is the way that we've always done it. This is the way that works. And I'm able to say, but does it really? But does it really? Anorexia relapse happens over 80% of cases. So how are you going to look at me and tell me that this is what works? That your track record speaks for itself. This is not working. And trying to get family and doctors to understand that the brain needs to be healed first, with or without weight gain, by using protein and fat, is such a large hurdle. I went back to some of my own doctors, hoping that they would be curious, hoping that they would listen to my story and possibly look into it, because I believed that even though their procedures were flawed and didn't help me and their meds were toxic, that at their heart, these doctors really did want to help their patients. And I was met with condescension. I always received one of two messages. Part of them told me that Carnivore was just masking my symptoms, and part of them said that I was experiencing a placebo effect. And both of them said I needed to get back under treatment or I was going to have a psychotic break. Neither camp group wanted to hear anything about how being in nutritional ketosis could actually help the brain of mental illness. It's extremely frustrating. It's frustrating at the top down with the hospitals, with the doctors. It's extremely frustrating with coming alongside parents who have asked for my help, but yet put the brakes on because my help does not follow the guidelines of what they've been told is going to help. And it's also extremely frustrating online when you're trying to share hope and help to others who are suffering or who have family members that are suffering. and these haters invade and feel the need to disparage and try to prove that the carnivore diet only worked for me because I stopped eating donuts or because I was in a calorie deficit and I lost weight. They know absolutely nothing about my history. They know absolutely nothing about where I've been and what I've experienced. And this had nothing to do with weight loss. It has nothing to do with stopping eating donuts and stopping eating French fries. And they're not open to learning. I'm so thankful for the doctors that we have that openly say, I used to doctor that way to my patients 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, and I openly admit that I was wrong, that I fixed my own health using a carnivore diet, using a ketogenic diet, like Anthony Chafee and Sean Baker and Ken Berry and Philip Ovadia and Sean O'Mara, all of these doctors, and Dr. Robert Kiltz, my hero, all of these doctors that are now understanding and have changed how they operate within the medical system. We need more of them. We need more of them coming out and saying that I used to follow the guidelines too, but they didn't work. And this is what works. And this is what heals. We need more voices.
I could not agree more. All those people you just mentioned are the true pioneers, and I'm very hopeful that we're going to see more and more, because as you said, most of the doctors out there are great people. They're not trying to poison us. They're not trying to give those vulnerable groups a bad treatment. They're just doing what they were told and what they were indoctrinated with in medical school.
Right.
So we just need to get through to those folks. This is actually happening. Here's a podcast to listen to. And I usually send those people, the doctors that you mentioned, because they don't want to hear us peasants talking about eating meat. That they're in that mode of needing to see the fancy letters next to the person's name with the authority, because they're still in that world, and that's okay, because those people are doing amazing. Just listening to Dr. Chafee just go off for an hour, and I don't think there's anyone on earth who will not at least rethink their position after hearing that guy just give a speech on where the guidelines went wrong, different studies that created this situation we're in. And another amazing woman I had on early on the podcast, Nina Teicholz. Everyone needs to read The Big Fat Surprise. That is the holy Bible of where we went wrong in nutritional science, and that's what people need to go check out as well if they're readers. But some people, podcasts are really the way, because when you're in that state of just it's really tough to do anything. Even reading is hard, and I've heard stories from people. I had a German girl on recently named Laura, who was in a horrible mental condition and physical condition, and pretty much she couldn't walk. She was stuck in her bed. So all she could do is listen to podcasts. And this is the beautiful thing about these audio and video platforms, is that it gives us the ability to share stories so easily, and you need so little mental capacity or physical capacity to absorb that information and get new ideas to try out. And I really just think that's so cool, and that's why I was motivated to finally do this and get on board, because everyone can play a part in this. I'm going to pass on going through the life of terrible, debilitating health struggles to do my part in helping. Like, people like you are just heroes for that. It's so awesome to have folks out there that are, you've been through the ringer, and we need people on both sides, people sharing the message, people like having the stories to share. And it's super exciting times. I'm super honored to be a part of it. I know you are too. You've been just busting your butt out there, getting on every single podcast you can, spending all your time on Twitter and the social media, making sure the message is out there. So you are making the world such a better place with what you're doing. And I'm just looking at the time here. I feel like it would probably be good. Speaking of, keeping things bite-sized for people out there who are vulnerable. I want this to be short enough to where people don't see that big scary over 2 hours mark and just click on a different video. So I think it'd be a good time to start wrapping this up. Why don't you finish this off here with your message to the folks out there who just feel like there isn't any hope? Because I know that there's a lot of people silently suffering out there who are just feeling like they've tried everything. Their brain isn't getting better, their body isn't getting better, whatever it may be. They just feel that optimism slipping away. And you were there for decades and you came out the other side. And I think you would be just a perfect person to just have a final word with these people. What do they need to be thinking about as we move forward?
There are several things that I say daily, that I say either verbally or in my posts on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, to speak to the utter hopelessness and helplessness that I felt, and that I know beyond the shadow of a doubt that if you're listening to this, I know what you're feeling. But I'm here to tell you, if you take away anything from this today, listen to me when I tell you that no one is beyond hope. No one is beyond healing, and no one is too far gone. I don't care if you've suffered for 5 years, for 10, for 2 decades, 3 decades, 4 decades. I don't care how many decades of your life that has been lost to physical or mental illness. Our bodies and our brains have a capacity to heal like you've never known. I was hopeless and I was helpless and I was skeptical that anything could make me better. And I am here to tell you that you can find freedom. You can find healing. That there is nothing worth in your life except for your health. Your health is your wealth. Your brain has an amazing capacity to heal if you give it what it needs and embark on a journey to take away what is harming it. You have nothing to lose. You have everything to gain. There are so many people that say that carnivore or some range of a ketogenic diet has given them a second chance at life. And you know what? I don't even say that. I say carnivore has given me my first chance at life, because I have no memories prior to being 3 years old where I feel like I feel now. This could be your first chance at life. This could be the chance at life to experience overflowing joy and vibrant health that you've never, ever known, that you don't have in your memories. You have nothing to lose and everything to gain.
Amen to that. I could not think of a better way to say that at the end there. I'm so thankful that you were able to join me today and share your amazing story, Valerie. Thank you so much for being here. I'm looking forward to following you on X even harder, watching all those replies that you're battling with and jump in there with you to help you with these idiots that don't know what they're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just such a pleasure to have you in my social circle now, to be in this fight with you, and we're going to change the world together, and couldn't be more optimistic. So really, really appreciate you being here today, and we will be in touch for sure for the future.
I am so thankful for you, Ben. I am so honored to be here and to be able to talk with you person to person. I've been looking forward to this for a long time.
It will not be the last. We'll talk soon.
Good. I would love that. Yeah, I
I'm
would
gonna
love
go eat a steak now.
Okay, me.
I'm so ready for some beef after this conversation. That's all I know. I'll talk to you later.
Okay.